Next on Weapons at War. In dogfights that are completed in the blink of an eye, the victor's mind slams through 1,000 images. The loser slams through eternity. No country can hope for total victory without this human terminator of flesh and blood, ego and guts. True stories of men in combat who flew and won over and over again. Top Guns, the Aces, next on Weapons at War.
There's no question that to be good in this arena and to survive in this arena, to be successful, one has to be a risk taker. One has to be willing to take the fight to the enemy. There were many who could have done what I did and never had the opportunity. There were some who had the opportunity, but they weren't ready for it, or they didn't take advantage of it. They didn't seize the moment and go for it when they had it.
He all of a sudden pulled up very strongly and turned to the left to go into the bomber group. And while he turned to the left, I cut under him, and while I was cutting under him, the tail of his plane exploded, and he was shot down. And then immediately I had all those Russian fighter planes on my back.
So I just rolled underneath like this as he's overshooting, reverse, squeeze the trigger, he blew up that quick.
Sure, it's exhilarating and it's kind of nerve-wracking at the same time, because you realize it's like big game hunting, only this time the tiger can hunt right back at you.
You're scared every time. You become less scared the more experience you get. Your first mission, am I going to come back from this? This is serious. What am I into?
Got the heads-up call. What heads-up meant was that they had us in sight and they'd been cleared to fire. That's another elevation of the adrenaline pumping. One really begins to look around at that point because we didn't have them in sight.
In Korea, where I flew into the ground, I'd been hit at such a low altitude that I knew the ejection seat would not save me. So I knew I was going to have to fly into the ground. You're sort of like riding in a big iron coffin when you hit the ground, and you just have to say, geez, I hope I make it.
You can have all the knowledge, you can have all the experience. If something happens to your engine, without any enemy hurting your plane at all, you can lose your life.
Only the spirit of attack born in a brave heart will overcome the odds.
Only the spirit of attack born in a brave heart will overcome the odds. The words of a famous German fighter ace of World War II. It is the professional credo for those inside the circle of the fighter business. To fight, to kill, to survive in the air takes hours to explain, years to learn, and just a few seconds to experience. But in those precious few seconds, a man will face the ultimate challenge, to survive. If he wins and lives, it is an ultimate feeling of relief and exhilaration that can never be known by those outside the circle.
There is a kinship, there's a spirit, there is a bond. The fighter business on its own is one of the most exciting and challenging and complex arenas that there is. Let's think of an arena where living or dying depends on winning or losing. And when one wins and one lives, it's a pretty exciting and pretty consuming feeling.
Flying fighter planes has always been an experience that requires skills and attitudes that very few possess. It is not just flying, but taking yourself and your airplane to the very limit, and sometimes beyond. When you climb into the cockpit, you must be willing to lie, cheat, and steal to win.
You compete on the rules that are established. If the rules that are established are to kill a guy, you go ahead and do that. You're doing what you're paid to do.
In the fighter business, it's totally impersonal. You don't know him, you may never even see him. Unless he bails out, you probably won't. But it's a machine against machine by two supposedly competent individuals who are getting the most out of this machine. And when you shoot down that MiG, it doesn't occur to you that you may have killed somebody. You beat that MiG. It's fairly impartial.
There was never a safe mission. If you defeated your enemy, you were the best, at least for that day. If you could shoot down 5 planes, you became an ace. For a fighter pilot, there is no higher honor. There was no secret to success. The will to win was the prime ingredient for victory.
You could look at him and say, this is a real cool cat. I'll be happy to let him fly my wing, or I'll let him fly his wing.
When I was a leader, I could look out on my pilots as I was briefing in combat, and 10% of them you could count on getting involved and mixing it up with the enemy, maybe firing their guns. 10% on the bottom of that scale would have engine trouble, turn around and go back, or something would happen and they would not see the enemy or not get involved. The remaining 80% would sort of be along, and they'd sort of be along for the ride. So it was a function of, you had to want to do it, and you had to say to yourself, I'm going to get involved in that.
The traditions of air combat originated in World War I, the war that introduced new machines and weapons even as it retired tactics and outdated theories. Flying on the Western Front, pilots like Baron von Richthofen, Eddie Rickenbacker, and many others became legends to a combat that seemed personal and honorable. It was here that modern rules of dogfighting were born.
Just the mere fact of having the opportunity to train on a daily basis is the key to any pilot's success, today or the future. With laser weapons coming down the line, with technology and aircraft performance, little has changed since Richthofen and Immelman. As I mentioned, they wrote the dictas on how to kill and survive in the air along with Oswald Boca back in 1915, 1916. A lot of those same rules apply today.
Some of those rules are: speed is life. Never get predictable. Keep track of your wingman, look for the tactical advantage, and stay aggressive.
So the challenge is to find out where your edge is and operate on the edge of your ability and, of course, the ability of the machines.
As a fighter pilot, you have to be alert to the fact that a standard pattern or standard procedure becomes predictable and it becomes a trap.
That's the maneuver of Oz, to catch them by surprise. I think any technical reference manual you find, even today, will tell you that any airplane performs best at full throttle. And the guy who gets to full throttle first is going to be the guy that wins. And boy, that's a cardinal rule, and that goes for anything all the time. If you get there first, the other guy's got to play catch-up from that point on.
As the fighter pilot legacy of dueling in the air grew during World War II in Korea, the tactics became more refined, the planes deadlier, and the pilots better trained. The window of staying alive in a fight began to decrease from minutes to seconds as guns gave way to missiles and plane speed increased. It took the air war in Vietnam to again prove that aggressive fighter crews still made the difference between victory and defeat.
In World War I, they had many, many airplanes. They had more time. You know, you'd see an airplane 10 miles away, it'd take you 20 minutes to get there. Now, a lot of times when you see an airplane, he's already launched his weapon at you. At a mile away, a MiG-21 is a dot. And the first thing you might see is that smoke trail. Well, now you've got to react to that. And then as soon as you beat that, you analyze, is he turning on you? Or is he overshot? Now my speed is such that I can reverse and engage with him, or there's more coming, I've got to disengage.
From all the pilots who fought, killed, and survived in the air, whatever their era, no matter the conditions, the will to win was the difference between living and dying. The successful pilots were the ones who survived.
When you fly combat, what you try to do in your own mind is line up the performance capabilities of your airplane and then the known performance capabilities of the enemy aircraft. And if you list them side by side on a piece of paper, you can tell where you are at an advantage and he's at an advantage. So then you don't, when you try to get into combat with him, you don't fight on a circumstance where he's better than you are at what you're trying to do.
The fighter business is a three-dimensional world of twisting speed and vertical turns where a man's brain can turn to water and pour out his ears. All he goes on is instinct. It is that instinct that makes an ace.
We were pioneering jet combat. We were operating at extreme altitudes and extreme speeds. That was the so-called envelope that the MiG operated in. So we operated in there too, or you didn't compete. We were scheduled on a sweep up and down the Yellow River. We came upon this flight of MiGs, which is actually directly below us at what we call 12 o'clock, low. So I rolled down behind him, and on the way down I noticed he had a red dragon painted the full length of his airplane, which gave me some concern. This was no novice. When I came out behind him, I couldn't have been more than 200 feet from him. And he filled up my windscreen, so I let him have it. He started to burn and immediately dove into the clouds, which was a real smart maneuver. He was going to throw me off. But he was burning so good that I could track him through the clouds by following the smoke trail. Then he would come out of the clouds and I'd hit him again and back into them, and this happened 3 or 4 times. The next thing I realized is we were both going straight down. The MiG went straight into the ground and hit so hard it didn't even burn. The only reaction was to start the pullout, and while leaning slightly forward, that threw my head down. In a 10G pullout, I couldn't sit up, although I made a Herculean effort to sit up and see whether I was going to bust my ass or make the pullout. I was out of control. And something in the back of your mind is counting for you and saying, now it's time to do this. And whether this is minutes or seconds or nanoseconds, you don't know. I gather that what I had done is do a loop in the process of making the pullout. Again, on that 5th MiG, I was totally out of control. And when I pulled out, I said, thank you, Lord, I'll take over now.
In World War II, Dick Bong with 40 kills and Tommy McGuire with 38 were the 2 leading American aces. Flying with either of them was a guarantee for seeing action.
Dick led the flight down, and when we broke out at the bottom, there was a great melee. I saw Dick break well out in front, of course, and he took a very high-angle snapshot at what looked to be an Oscar fighter, and it made a turn to the right, climbing towards the attacking end of Dick Bong. He took a snapshot. It couldn't have been more than 1 second, maybe a second and a half, and he blew it up. I broke the other way because there was a jack fighter that looked like it was going to come in on the left-hand side of our flight. It did not. It turned slightly away from me and started downhill. I simply pulled him back and followed him down. I hit him 3 times, and the third one blew him up. And by this time I was close enough to him that I flew through the debris, of which there was a good deal. My flight leader saw my predicament and came up alongside and said, let's get the hell out of here, because I couldn't see where I was going. He talked me down, helped me get on the ground, which we did successfully. The airplane, as it later turned out, was what we call Class 26. I've flown through so many parts that it torn up the airplane pretty bad.
If combat could frighten a man, it could also intoxicate him. It is hard to resist a world in which one lives only for today.
We had a visit from a USO troop of the Broadway show Oklahoma, and I was able to meet one of the dancers, a young lady by the name of Eloise. She and I palled around together on the few days that they were there. Everybody wanted to take a ride in a P-38. Eloise was much too popular to let go in the normal course of events, so I said, you'd like to go up too, I suppose? And she said, oh, indeed I would, you know. Where's my parachute and how do I get in the airplane? So the morning came that we were going to do a strafing mission, routine air-ground support mission. We had a wonderful time. We got off the ground and she was pounding on my back. Her head is leaning over my shoulder because it's kind of cramped inside the cockpit with the canopy closed. And about halfway down the run, as I'm checking gun switches and so forth, I got this wrapping on my shoulder, just pounding, and I looked up and she was pointing out the window and shouting in my ear, "What is that?" And I looked over to the left, and here were the little red tracers of anti-aircraft coming up, and not very close to us, but I told her, I said, "They're shooting at us." And she screamed and says, "Well, let's shoot back." I said, "Okay." So we did.
The will to win can never be fully understood using words. Bud Mahurin overcame the fear and the odds necessary to survive 2 wars against 3 enemies.
I'm the only person who shot down aircraft in Germany and in Japan and in Korea. So that's unique in that sense. Now, I'm not sure what that meant because I got shot down everywhere I went. I'm the first one in the world to admit that first 10 or 12 missions, I was scared to death. I sat in the cockpit and figured, oh my God, I'm going out and I'm going to get killed. I flew in Europe against the Germans until March the 27th of 1944. And on that day, we were attacking a city called Tours in France, and I looked down and saw a twin-engine German bomber scooting along the ground, and I could see the top turret blinking back at me, and I knew he was fighting. And I finally shot him down. And all of a sudden, there was an explosion, fire came out of the cowling, and I bailed out. I ended up by making contact with the French underground. I was in France for a month and 3 days. It's like a great Z movie, and I don't want to get into it too far. So I got transferred to the Pacific and managed to shoot down a Japanese aircraft in the Philippine Islands. A little bit later on, I had to bail out of a P-51. It seems like it takes 4 years for that parachute to open once you've pulled the ripcord. Of course, it only takes probably a second or 2 seconds, but that's what your mind does. Pretty soon, this air sea rescue boat showed up, and I got on board, and they handed me a cup of hot chocolate, and I drank it down and instantly went to the stern and threw up everything I'd eaten for about 10 days, I think. When the Korean War broke out, I went off to war flying F-86s, and on the 5th mission, I was carrying 2 1,000-pound bombs. I rolled over and dropped the bombs and told the rest of the guys that I was getting anti-aircraft fire. As I turned around, I looked down on the ground and saw a truck going down a road, and I thought, well, I'll just go down and pick that truck off, and then I'll have a good story to tell the boys at the club when I get back to base. And when I got down low and slow to shoot the truck, of course, I got hit. And cockpit filled with smoke. I called over the radio and said I'd been hit. You don't say, I've been hit in that tone of voice, you say, I've been hit. I had to pass over another couple of heavily defended towns, got hit about 4 more times, and ended up my flying airplane into the ground. It crashed in a rice paddy. It broke up. It turned over a couple of times, and I broke my left arm when I got out, covered with mud, and I couldn't walk through the mud. I just kept slipping and sliding, and so of course the North Korean and Chinese soldiers got me within 5 minutes after I'd hit the ground. I was in the hands of the North Koreans for about 45 days, then became a prisoner of Chinese communists. I didn't speak to another individual, speak at all, for about 7.5 months. I also didn't get a bath for 7.5 months. It was a very unsatisfying experience, and since it took 16 months, it took too long. But as far as flying F-86s in North Korea, I use this word and I always kind of smirk at it. It was just as much fun as flying P-47s in England.
Tally-ho, Hugs tally.
Okay, tally-ho.
Tally-ho, I got him.
Going the other way. Okay. He's no threat to you now. He's no threat. Nope.
If one is good, two is better.